Texas Lutheran University.
Hello and welcome. I'm so glad that you were able to join me to talk a little bit about the population of Texas and the changes primarily over the last 50 or 60 years. We're going to take a look at where we've been, where we are at the moment, but what do these numbers mean and what does it mean about going forward? The slides and the numbers that I am showing you today come from our Texas Demographer. Yes, Texas, we have our own state demographer. We're that big. They're located at the University of Texas at San Antonio, and you can go to their website for more information. And I wanted to make sure that I give them credit for that. And what I will be doing with you mostly with these slides and with these numbers is sharing you a little bit about my perspective about what this all means. So let's get started. Looking at our first slide, it gives you an overview of the total population and population change of Texas from 1950 to the year 2014. For the first few decades, you can see we were pretty stable at about 7 to 9 million people, but beginning in the 1980s, you can see that's where really things started happening. In 1950, there were 7.7 million people in the state of Texas. And then from 1960 to 1970, the population was growing, but not at a rate that we've seen recently. Beginning in the 1980s, all the way up through the year 2015, just stop and take a look at that. In 1980, we were at a little over 14 million people, but by the year 2015, we're at 27.5 million people. Do the math. That's 13 million people. Pretty impressive. So now that you see all the looking at the numbers over the decades, let's look at a couple of slides here that take it Texas county by county. The first slide you see here is looking at, this is an estimation of population by county in Texas in the year 2015. I want to draw your attention first and foremost to the areas that are in yellow. These are counties in 2015 that experienced a very small population of 10,000 people or less. The areas that you see in green to the blue, and of course when you get to the darker blue, that is where the vast majority of people live. Your eyes can't help but be drawn to what is referred to as the Golden Triangle. The area at the north with the Dallas-Fort Worth cities, going to the southwest down towards San Antonio and over to the eastern portion of the Houston area. Out of the 27 million people that live in Texas, the vast majority of them live within this Golden Triangle. And another way to look at it is an east-west divide, the power of a highway. Interstate 35, which is considered a classic dividing line between the east and west part of Texas, as well as the United States, but it's also a dividing line between the heavily populated areas of Texas versus the lesser areas of population in Texas. And also to remind you, maybe how did we get that way? The North America Free Trade Agreement that was signed or began in the 1980s and eventually signed, opening up trade between Mexico all the way up through Canada. Interstate 35 is the pipeline of that trade deal, and that has impacted the growth patterns of this state. It's one thing to look at total population, and it's another thing to think about percentages. This map here, another county map of Texas, is looking at from the year 2010 to the year 2015 population, or the estimated population change. I'm sorry, the next slide will be looking at percentages. But from 2010 to 2015, what counties experienced population growth and what counties experienced population decline? Again, you see what you saw before, that Golden Triangle area of the Dallas-Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, Houston Metroplex region, the dividing line between the east and the western part of the state of Texas, with the eastern part experienced the population growth. But let's take a moment here to look at the areas in red. A serious issue that we have in Texas. We hear about growth, we hear about economic opportunity, but we're not thinking about what does this mean for the state as a whole. Beginning in about the 1950s, and a trend we started seeing in the 1960s, and certainly the trend has only continued, and that is a population shift from the rural areas of Texas to the urban areas of Texas. For so long, this state still relies heavily on, but even more so on agriculture. We've seen a lot of changes within the agricultural industry that has had an impact on population. So every county you see in red is a county that has lost numerical population from 2010 to 2015. The areas that are in orange have experienced very minimal growth. And then the areas that you see in green, finally the ones in dark blue, these are the counties that have experienced growth, and then with the dark blue counties, the ones that have experienced the greatest amount of growth. Going back to areas that have lost population, you can see up in the upper right-hand corner that out of all the counties in Texas, and there are a lot of them, 99 of them have lost population. So again, we're looking at hard numbers itself. Shifting to percentages. The estimated percentage change of the total population by county, you're looking at this like the chart or the graph before where the population of 2010 to 2015, the actual number change. These are taking those same numbers and getting you to think about what does this mean in terms of percentage. Once again, your eye is drawn to that triangle area as well as the west versus east. Kind of going on the map before where you saw the areas in red and orange that were either stable or losing. These counties in yellow, you see that they have had a percentage of either no growth or negative growth all the way down to losing almost 15% of its entire county's population. Then for the rest of the map that you're looking at, when you get into the light tans all the way to the dark browns, these are counties that have experienced growth as showing in percentages, with the dark brown areas experience the highest percentage growth of 10 to almost 37% growth. I want to stop for a minute and just get you to think about what does that mean. You were looking at just raw numbers, but now I want you to think differently. I want you to think about percentages. What if you live in a county where there are 10,000 people and you experience a 3% growth rate? That's 3,000 people that are moving into an area of 10,000. If you were to have 3,000 people move into your area and there's not many to begin with, that's pretty significant. It's not the same as, just say you live in the city of Houston, which measures in the millions, and you might have 90 or 100,000 people move in that 1 year. You are better able to absorb that. You already have the infrastructure in place. Yes, it's going to put strain on your infrastructure, but you have the mechanisms in place to handle the influx of this large coming in of people. Going back to so many counties in Texas, some of the smaller counties, especially the areas that experienced the economic boom with the Eagle Ford Shale, small counties and with cities such as Pleasanton, Three Rivers, these are towns that were maybe 3,000 in population prior to the Eagle Ford Shale boom that saw an influx of 10, 20, 30,000 people. That is when you're dealing with that kind of percentage change of 20, 30, 40%. That is very different when you're dealing with that kind of growth as opposed to just a few percent. My hometown of New Braunfels, for example, we have been experiencing just about a 5% growth rate. What does that mean? About maybe 15, 20 years ago, there were only about 30, 35,000 people in New Braunfels, but over that 10 to 15 year period, we now have a size of a city of about 70,000 people. And we are expected to continue that in the next 10 years to reach about 100,000 people. To go from a town about 30 to 35,000 to well over 100,000 in the span of just a few decades, that is very different, and it means something very different. So for the sweet spot for growth, cities want to be at about 2 to 4%. That you can manage. Anything less, you need to stop and think about what is happening that people are not coming here. Usually it's economic. Or if you're experiencing growth on the other side where it's above 4%, you're having too many people coming in, and that is a whole different set of dynamics. You have a strong economy, but is your economy growing so fast that so many people are coming there, how do you handle this population? What about homes, schools, hospitals, basic things such as water, electricity, and even things like road? This is kind of where we are in Texas. And again, things I want you to think about and not forget in the back of your mind. So with that, let's go back to our map here, looking at percentage change as a total population of Texas. And these numbers might mean something very different for you now. So those areas in the very, very dark brown, from the lighter brown to the darkest brown, these are counties that are experiencing a percentage growth rate anywhere from 5 to 37%. This is a very different set of issues, and probably for me going forward, this is one of the biggest issues and a concern. We have got to make sure that we are ready and prepared for the growth going forward. And then likewise, we need to be mindful of our neighboring counties that are experiencing population decline. Are we doing everything we can for them to make sure that the transition is smooth as they're experiencing the changes that they see? Now we move on to the next two charts here, looking at specific counties. Let me just kind of orient you to what it is that you're seeing. The far left column is just the names of the counties. Then the next column over, you're looking at where these counties rank in terms of the United States. Then they're looking at the actual number or the percentage of that change. And then out of the change, for example, this first slide is looking at Texas counties for numeric growth in a one-year period from 2014 to 2015. Let me walk you through one and then go back to the map, the chart as a whole. Harris County, for example, was the one county in Texas that experienced the most numeric change from 2014 to 2015. Where does that rank in terms of the United States? Well, number one. How much of the growth did they experience from 2014 to 2015? They saw a population change of about 90,000 people. Of that change, what percent of it was from natural increase? What does natural increase mean? That means women in Texas giving birth to Texas babies. As simple as that. Out of the 90,000, 49% of it came through natural increase. The other 50-something% came from people moving into Houston. And then that very last column, out of the 50%, what percent of that came from international migration? And you can see that is 32%. So by walking you through across Harris County, across the line, then when you go to the rest of the chart, you can see the top 10 counties in Texas that experienced the most growth, where they rank in terms of the United States. And just stop and think, out of the 10 that we have, those 10 rank in the top 30 counties out of all counties in the United States. And that represents tens of thousands of counties. Then you can see the population change and the natural increase. But the last thing I want to point out from this chart before we move on is how much of that is coming in from people that are moving into Texas. All counties but one. All nine of the counties, the majority of the people moving in were those that were coming in from outside of Texas. And then we had a variety of areas that experienced, out of those numbers, a significant amount that came in from the international population, which Houston and Dallas being up there, number one and number two. Going back to percentages. Kind of going before, it's one thing to be looking at numbers and it's another one to be looking at percentages. And because of that, this chart it's the same kind of thing where you're looking at the county, where does it rank within the United States, what is the percent change, how much of that is from migration, and then out of that from migration, what percentage of that is from international migration. Instantly you will know one thing, these counties are very different from the ones you saw before. A lot of these are smaller counties where they started off with a small size, so they start from a smaller number, so it doesn't take a whole lot to have a high percentage of growth. So where Harris County was number one in the chart before, Hays County is number one on this one. Hays County from 2013 to 2014 experienced the largest percentage change of growth in Texas. And not only was that in Texas, people listening to me, that is in the entire United States of America. Right behind that is my county that I live in. We came in at number 2 in Texas, but we're also number 2 in the United States. Out of that, New Braunfels, Texas, the town I live in, was the second fastest growing city in 2013 to 2014 in the entire United States of America. Hays and Comal County, though, where do they lie? They lie in between San Antonio and Austin. In San Antonio and Austin, for anybody listening to me who live in that area, you know what we are dealing with. We are the fastest growing area in Texas, as well as the United States of America. Then for the rest of the chart there, I'm sure your eye is wandering up and down to kind of take a look to see what is going on, and it is interesting to look at. So these slides up to this point have been growth, 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 growth. Of course, what is driving that growth? Simple, jobs. The last few governors that we've had in Texas, they have been extremely aggressive in recruiting economic growth into Texas. In the 1970s and the 1980s, we relied primarily on two key economic means to make a living. That was agriculture and the oil, basically the oil industry. In the 1980s, we saw the decline of the oil industry, and then certainly with the changes in the agricultural industry, we've seen job decline in there as well. Our leadership, rightly so, realized we need to do one thing. We needed to not one, diversify our economy, and then secondly, be aggressive in promoting about why Texas is a great place to live. So this one here, you can see from 2004 to 2014, Texas led the country in U.S. job growth with over 2 million jobs. Out of those 2 million jobs, what did that mean in terms of all the jobs added in the entire United States from 2004 to 2014? We had almost 30% of all new jobs created were right here in the great Lone Star State, with California, New York, and North Carolina being right behind. Kind of leaving the job growth behind and getting back to population as a whole, this chart here is where are the people, well, let me just give the title, the 10 U.S. states with the largest average annual net domestic migration by rank from 2005 to 2014, again, when those jobs were being grown in the economy in the United States, and 30% of them were happening here in Texas. You can see during that decade or so, Texas was the #1 in the United States with an average annual net domestic migration by rank at about 125,000 people every year during that period. So Texas, again, reflective of growth through that economic, the dynamics of promoting economics in Texas. Taking a step back again, this chart here looks at components of population growth by percent. Again, we're dealing with percentages here in Texas from 1950 to the year 2010. Take a minute here, just kind of look at the bar graphs as they go across. It's doing it by decades, and the difference in colors here, you're looking at blue, which represents percentage growth of Texas by natural increase. Remember what that definition is. So the blue is natural increase, and the red represents people that are moving into Texas. Thinking about the story that you've heard thus far, certainly in the 1950s and the 1960s, Texas growth, again, was coming primarily from women in Texas that were having children in Texas, and that's how we were increasing our population. So in the 1950s, almost 90% of the population change, percentage-wise in Texas, about 90% of it was through natural increase, with about 10% of it coming in from outside of Texas. That trend continued through the 1960s, but your eye can't help but going to the 1970s. What's happening there? Where we see a drastic decline, or not so much a drastic decline, that was representing with a lot of people started moving to Texas. Well, in the 1970s, on a national scale, what was going on? This was the beginning of what was called the Rust Belt decade of the 1970s. Take a step back in history and think about the United States in 1970. A lot was happening on a global scale. A lot of corporations were beginning the process of offshoring or outsourcing their jobs, where manufacturing was leaving this country and moving to places such as the Asian countries that were there, with heavy manufacturing being impacted the most. Those steel factories, car factories, a lot of those jobs were being shipped overseas, and a lot of people were being put out of work up in the Midwest and the New England and Northeast area, hence the name of the Rust Belt. Well, when those people were being thrown out of job, states in the South were realizing an opportunity to grow their economies. They were shifting their economies, and advertising comes south. So as the Rust Belt was being created in the North, people were moving to what was called the Sun Belt of the South, and Texas certainly played a part in that. So going back here to looking at the chart, that's part of the reason for the shift of the 1970s. But again, the 1980s, with that decade of growth, we saw a little bit of a decade of decline with the collapse of the oil industry, but also the collapse of the savings and loan industry, which had a huge impact on our economy in the 1980s. But by the 1990s, things had settled down, new governorships coming in, and going back to that focus I talked about earlier about diversifying our economy, and you saw that trend that started to continue that we've been in ever since, the increase of people moving to Texas. Going a bit further, domestic in-migration and out-migration. Of course, we know people are moving here, but there are also people who leave Texas. So this chart here, real quickly, let me just kind of orient you to it. The line that you're looking in blue represents the number of people that are moving out of Texas. The line that you see in tan, in the tan brown color, represents people that are moving into Texas. The bottom of the chart gives you the numbers in the year 2005. The top of the chart takes you to the year 2013. And basically one thing that you need to take away from this particular chart, that there are more people moving into Texas than there are leaving Texas. You might be wondering, where are these people coming from and going to? This chart tells you that. But do note that this chart is only for the year 2013. I know that your eye is immediately drawn to the bottom of the screen where you're looking at California. California has been and continues to be the biggest contributor of people that are moving within the United States into Texas. And you can see that 62,000 people from California came here in the year 2013. But likewise, a lot of people from Texas are moving to California. Remember that job growth chart where you had before with the pies of how many jobs were being created in each state, and Texas had over 2 million, but California had added a lot of jobs as well, and people, of course, are taking advantage of that. But very quickly, you can kind of see some of the other states where people are coming from: Illinois, Florida, certainly our neighboring states of New Mexico, Oklahoma, and likewise. We've been looking at mostly just numbers. Now we're going to start moving into some of the slides that look at other aspects of population change, such as age, ethnic makeup, and gender. So this slide that you're looking at race, ethnicity, percent, distribution for domestic migrants in Texas, but also total population. The main thing I want you to take away from this particular slide is the very top bar graph that you might see in gray. First and foremost, over on the left-hand side, what you're looking at here is the categories of ethnicity that is counted. When people fill out a census, they are asked to claim an ethnic. Of course, this is by self-selection, and as those numbers are gathered, they are reported, and then demographers graph them out as you see here in front of you. So kind of to walk you through what these mean, you have other non-Hispanic, well, one non-Hispanic as opposed to Hispanic. That's important for Texas, so there's a good portion of our population that claims Hispanic, and then the rest of the groups are going to be declared non-Hispanic and then broken down by further ethnicities. So other non-Hispanic, what does that mean? That is primarily people who claim a native population or a foreign population, but they become counted as part of the citizenry. Then you have Asian non-Hispanic, then Hispanic, Black non-Hispanic, and then Anglo non-Hispanic, which I think you have no problem understanding. Then going back to that top bar there, you can see that from 2005 to 2013, in the Hispanic category, out of all the population in Texas, 36.8% claim a Hispanic heritage. Black non-Hispanic is about 11%, and Anglo non-Hispanic is 46.4%. Please remember these numbers, because this is what is going to happen and what is going to change in Texas, is the demographic shift from a non-Hispanic population to a Hispanic majority population that we have. Net domestic migration to Texas by age and sex from the year 2013. This is looking at male versus females, and there's one thing here you can see, that most people moving here are men, and that is driven in large part by the natural gas industry. I always laugh when I hear people who travel through South Texas or West Texas, they talk about man camps. Well, there you go. The largest category, male or female, we have more males moving here, and that younger demographic of age 18 through 44 represents the largest number that we have. Annual shares of recent non-citizen immigrants to Texas by rural area of birth from 2005 to 2013. One, that's a mouthful for what that title means, but basically what it's asking you to look at here is non-citizen immigrants. These are people who have come from a foreign country into Texas under mechanisms such as a work visa or the different visa categories that we have. These are people that come here through the many legal channels that we have. And so that's what it's tracking here, and then it's breaking it down by what parts of the world they're coming from. The main thing I want you to focus in here on this particular chart, let's look at the bottom in 2005, and then we'll take a comparison snapshot to the year 2013. Out of all the non-citizen immigrant in the year 2005, 69.4% are coming from Latin America, 17% from Asia, about 7% from Europe, and about 5% from Africa and other parts of the world. We certainly hear a whole lot these days, and especially in the presidential race that we have, a lot about immigration. We hear a whole lot about conversation of building a wall, of being more aggressive with our immigration policy, and we hear words about people coming from Mexico. Yes, we have a large portion of our population coming from not just Mexico, but all of Latin America. But I want you to stop and think about from 2005 to 2013 and just look at what's happening with the Latin American population. Number one, it is shrinking. This is an impact of, yes, our immigration policies, and yes, by putting in harder barriers and spending millions of dollars on border patrol. But what we failed to realize in this sharp decline is an improving economy in countries in Latin America. Mexico's economy has been improving, which has lessened the need for people to leave, as well as the other unspoken component to think about are the drug wars that are happening in Latin America. A lot of people are not coming through here because it's a very dangerous area to go through from Mexico to try to get into this country. So that's having an impact as well. So where 69% of the non-citizen immigrant came from Latin America by the year 2013, that had declined down to 43%. And let's look at the shift of the Asian population. 17% were there in 2005 to where now it is 40%. So hopefully by looking at this particular slide, you're seeing a different picture from what you might be hearing right now in the political discussions that you're having. Kind of moving forward, you might be wondering about, well, what about the population that you sometimes hear referred to as being here illegally? Well, one, we call these people unauthorized immigrants, and the next two slides just give you a very quick snapshot as to what's happening there. Kind of looking at this particular chart, if you can see the arrow that is pointing here, this is taken from the Pew Foundation. In the year 2012, we estimate that about 11.3 million of our population was here through unauthorized means. Then when you look at this particular map of the United States, the areas in the darker brown is where the largest numbers of these people currently live. California comes in as number 1, and Texas is at number 2, as well as Florida and New York being not far behind. But you can see every state in the United States has a portion of this unauthorized immigrant population. Of course, these people are coming here for economic opportunity, just as other people move here from Texas to find jobs. These people are looking for jobs too, as a means to make life better for their family. So what percentage of that number make up our workforce? So out of that 11.2 million, percentage-wise, 8.9% of them are finding work in Texas, and California and Nevada, of course, being higher than that. Nevada has the largest percentage at 10%, California at 9%, but Texas is not far behind at 8.9%. I hope this map makes you realize one thing, that there is a lot of work that we need to do with our immigration policies. Now we're really going to take a step back here with this next slide. This slide here is a little bit different from what we've been looking at. We're looking at, first off, Texas when it was first becoming when it first came into the United States, with our first census count being in 1850, up to the last census count in the year 2010. It's basically telling you two things. The brown line is taking a look at the native-born population in Texas. What percent does that make up in relationship to the United States as a whole? So in the year 1850, right, a little bit less than 1% of the population of out of all the people living in Texas, right at 1% of native-born U.S. population, right at 1% were in Texas. And then you can see from 1850 all the way down to the year 2010, out of the 330-something million people that live in Texas, that are U.S. citizens, native-born, U.S. women giving birth to U.S. babies. What does that mean in terms of Texas native population? We make up about 7.8% of the entire United States. So Texas, it gives you the impact of the growth of Texas and why we are important. But I hope your eye is being drawn to that blue line. That is looking at the Texas foreign-born population as a percent of U.S. foreign-born population. And one thing we can see, we have a growing percentage of the foreign-born population living in Texas compared to the United States as a whole. With the year 2010, out of the 100% of the people who were foreign-born in the United States, 10% lived in Texas. Another way to look at it, and an easier way to look at, is this particular chart that just takes those numbers and maps it out, very easy for you to see, and your eye quickly tells you one thing, that we have a growing foreign-born population in the state of Texas. Let's now shift and think about the future. Where are we headed? This is projected population growth in Texas in the year 2010. Give you a second here to kind of familiarize yourself with this particular chart. We start in the year 2010, about 25 million people that live here. Taking it out to the year 2050, what might we look like going forward? In the year 2010, if we were to close off all borders and allow no one else to move to Texas, whether they were coming from another state in the United States or from a country outside the United States, so if we didn't add one more person other than natural increase, by the year 2050, we would go from 25 to about 31 million people. That's still significant, but that's not going to happen. Instead, we are going to continue to grow because people will continue to come here. What the top line looks at here is if nothing changes. If the growth patterns that we saw from the year 2000 to 2010, if nothing were to change by the year 2050, hang on, we would have almost 55 million people living in Texas. That's significant. But that's not going to happen too. We're going to probably end up somewhere in the middle. In this middle line here, if you take the growth from 2000 to 2010, cut that percentage in half, where are we most likely to be by the year 2050? We probably end up with about 38 to about 42 million people. That's still a lot of people. This next one here is basically the same thing, but it's looking from the year 2010 to the year 2015, projecting it out. Of course, you now already know we have 27 million people in Texas. So as a way to kind of look at how accurate are these maps, or these projections, well, we were projecting back in 2010, by the year 2015, at the high end, we'd be a little over 28 million people. On the low end, if nobody else came, we would still be at about 26 million people. Well, we're about 27.7 million. So you can see here we are right about accurate. So going forward, this is why I have confidence in some of these charts that will be at about 40 million people. Looking at gender, male, female, this is very quickly a population pyramid. This side of the chart is looking at the males. This side is looking at the females. The darker blue, this is the actual number. The darker red is the actual number of females. The lighter shades are the projections. This is the hard number in the year 2010. This is looking at the year 2030. And what does this do? It maps it out number-wise by age cohorts, and taking it from 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, and so forth. What do I want you to take away from this particular population pyramid is going back to the male versus female. We will have and continue to have a heavy male population in Texas when we compare it to the female population in Texas. Projected racial and ethnic percentage. Again, we looked at what are the whole numbers, but what does it mean with ethnicity? Going back to one thing that we know, that Texas will have a Hispanic majority going forward. Looking at here in the year 2010, out of the total number of the projections, we have about 10 million population claiming Hispanic, but let's say we hit that 40 million. Out of that 40 to 50 million, how many that will be? We're projecting about 30 million to be Hispanic in the year 2050. This is an issue that we need to be prepared for. The culture and literally the face of Texas is going to change, and are we doing our job to make sure that that change goes smoothly? And some of the last, we're almost at the end here. We have about maybe 3 slides left, and we're still, again, in the future, going forward. If you think back, when I started this presentation, we were looking at just numbers. We were looking at the county map of Texas and the actual population change that was happening. This map here takes you back to population change, but this is projected changes. So remember that one graph where we were looking at anywhere from 40 to 50 million people? That's what we're looking at here mapped out. But this is looking at where we think they're going to move to as they move to Texas. And once again, we're going to end with where we start. The Golden Triangle area of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, down that I-35 corridor to the San Antonio region, going out on the I-10 interstate towards the Houston area, and back up to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, that Golden Triangle. But as well, we have other areas going on I-35. Let's not forget about the Laredo area. Let's not forget about our neighbors to the south in the Rio Grande Valley area, the city of El Paso out in West Texas, and the Lubbock-Fort Worth area. Looking at actual projected population change, the areas in the darkest blue will experience the largest numerical increase, and the lighter you go, the less that is there. Well, let me just get you, I'm going to focus in on just the San Antonio and Austin area as an example of what we need to be thinking about. Sorry about that. So San Antonio from 2010 to 2050 is expected to have anywhere from 1 million to 3.5 million people move there. It's a lot of people. Same thing up here, this is Austin, but further north, the Georgetown Round Rock area, again, 1 million to 3.5 million people. Counties in between, that's Hays County, Comal County, the fastest growing and the second fastest growing counties in Texas. They will be adding from 100 to 1 million people during that time frame. What does that mean when you add it all up? Between San Antonio and Austin, between the year 2010 to the year 2050, we can expect to add about 4 to 5 million people. You can look at it as one of two ways. You can either be the Chicken Little scenario, the sky is falling, there's too many people. Yes, that's one way to look at it. But then again, you can also look at it, and if you're young out there listening to this, man, you don't need to move anywhere. Think about all the opportunity, the things that are come. What I want you to think about is, how do we get there? How do we get there, and are we thinking in those means? That's the most important thing to be thinking about. So going back to the map that you have here, just looking at the San Antonio and Austin area, the same can be said for the Dallas-Fort Worth, the Houston area, the Rio Grande Valley area, Webb County with Laredo, there on the border, El Paso, and back at the Panhandle. Our challenges are out there for Texas, and hopefully you will see the glasses being half full and the opportunities, as opposed to the glass being half empty, and worry about it, and don't be the Chicken Little, and don't panic. What I want you to do is to plan and be prepared. The next one, which is the next to the last slide, is looking at percentages. So again, going back to what I said before, it's one thing to look at actual number changes, but what does it mean to be with percentage change? And remember, I said that sweet spot, 2 to 5% growth change. You can handle 10%, 20%. And we were looking at actual changes that got all the way up to 36.6%. Of course, that was looking at maybe just a few years or within a decade. This map is getting you to think about a longer time period, over a 40-year period. But with thinking that in mind, you're probably looking at these numbers and just staggered at what they represent. First off, let me go back to those counties in the western part of Texas that are experiencing population decline. You can see the projections are that they're going to pretty much remain flat or continue to experience that decline. The rural to urban migration is going to continue. Then when you get into the very light green counties, look at that number, 0 to 40% increase. And those are counties on the lower end of the scale. The next categories from the darker green to the blue, these are counties that can experience a 40 to a 250% increase. That is staggering. But stop and think about that darkest category. I'm 52. I probably won't be here in the year 2050, but for those of you who are going to be here, what an exciting time to be living in. Or, I don't know, you might be thinking, how will we do this? It's almost like thinking of a tsunami wave about to hit. 250 to 500% change. Wow. So the last slide that I have here for you, you've seen a lot of numbers, and it's been a lot of information that I've thrown at you very, very quickly. But what do I want you to do? Just not take these numbers and sit around at your next coffee break or during a lunch hour at a cocktail party saying, man, this is what I heard. This is cool. No, I want you to think, and I want you to plan, and I want you to be prepared. And not just be prepared, but going forward, many people, our business community, our political community, a lot of our communities need to be prepared for what is about to happen in Texas. And the good news is many of our leaders are thinking about this and they are planning. But let's take a look at these questions I'm asking you, things to consider going forward. A lot of our growth is intentional. We've had governors who have worked very hard to diversify our economy and change the laws to make it attractive for businesses to come here. And it's working. People are moving here by the millions. But what if we have leadership that decides to stop that economic growth? Or what about what is happening right now? Gas prices are down. And as a result of those gas prices going down, that going back to the Eagle Ford Shale area, those tens of thousands of people who moved there for jobs, they are now gone. With the gas prices declining, the jobs, they're shutting down wells and the people are leaving. So what happens if the economy declines? We are ramping up for tremendous population growth based on these projections, but we need to be mindful that we keep our economy growing for that. Or if there's something that happens on a national or a global scale that interrupts that, we need to be prepared for that too. The next question I have here, I believe, is the most important question we can ask. What about water? I live, again, back in the Central Texas area, and it's all about water. In fact, I think it's pretty much the case for the whole state of Texas. Coming back to that San Antonio area, back about a decade ago, we knew one thing: population was increasing. San Antonio had about a little over 1 million people. Austin was growing well over 1 million people, and we were looking at the numbers, and we were expecting about 4 million people to be moving into that area. Well, here in the year 2016, we're there. We have that 4 million people. But when we were looking at about a decade or 2 decades ago, we knew one thing: we had a water supply for only 6 million people. Good planning did one thing: we started looking for new water sources. We are growing our water supply, but we do have, even though the rain falls and it falls out of the sky, we still have to think of a limited water supply. We have to look for new sources, or we have to bring water in. That is the issue going forward. Right now, water is cheap. But if we're going to have a population of 50 million people and we have to have water, we're going to have to turn to very innovative means such as desalination. Putting in a desalination plant is extremely expensive. Some of these can be as expensive as a nuclear plant. What does that mean for water? Well, going forward, supply and demand. The demand can possibly outstrip supply. And what happens to that? Prices will go up to keep your market in check. The days of cheap water are going to be days that are going to go very quickly. I think going forward in the next few decades, a few pennies per gallon will be a thing of the past. We could easily see that a gallon of water, when you take your shower right now, for every gallon that comes through, you're paying about 3 to 8 cents for that gallon of water. And you might use, upwards to 50 to 100 gallons at a time. It could very well be that that 1 gallon of water might cost you 50 cents. Think about that cost of the shower. Think about what does that mean to your pocketbook. This is the issue going forward. Let's go back to these other questions that I have here to kind of wrap this up. Will infrastructure growth keep pace with population growth? Are we building the roads? Are we building the schools? Are we building the housing? Are we building the hospitals? Yes, we are, but if we experience that 20% change, can we build it fast enough? Which is the question I have there. Are we keeping pace with planning? Planning, you have to be 20 to 30 years ahead if you want to do planning well. The next question here, going back to the political season we're in, we hear a lot of talk about immigration. What happens if we change immigration policies? Depending on how the election turns out, we may have one administration that loosens the borders, and we'll see probably more people coming here. And if there's another administration coming in, there will be very, very harsh immigration policies in. And again, what does that do to impact our planning? The next question we have here, how mindful will we be of possible cultural changes? As we see the Anglo non-Hispanic population becoming the majority population of Texas and the Hispanic population becoming the majority, how are we planning for that? Are we doing what we need to do? We hear a lot of talk about bilingualism. I think bilingualism is a good thing that could possibly be there. So how mindful are we of possible cultural changes? And then just thinking about the foreign population, that is increasing as well. And when we see people coming from other areas of Asia, Africa, and other places like that, where their cultures are extremely different, their languages are different, their religions are different, are we thinking about what that means, and are we planning for that? Which leads me to, how do we do that? It's that bottom question that you have right there in front of you. Will we do our job to educate future Texans? I hope this 45, 50 minutes that I've spent with you, I've done a little bit to educate you. What I want you to do is take what you now know, share it with others, but more importantly, I want you to be thinking about, what does this mean for you? What might this mean for your children, your grandchildren? And bottom line for me, I'm excited about the future of Texas. We need diversity because that is what has made this country great. That is what makes Texas great. But what is happening here is what is happening in the United States, and actually it's what's happening around the world. A lot is changing. Don't be afraid of the change. Just learn about the change and celebrate that change. Thank you.
For more information, please visit tlu.edu.